Hey, welcome into this Adobe Photoshop tutorial brought to you by tutvid.com. My name is Nathaniel Dodds, and today we're going to take a look at 10 obscure and somewhat hidden features in Photoshop. I use the word hidden at the very heavy risk of sounding very clickbaity, but I say hidden because I just think they're features that a lot of people don't know about or use. So hopefully you're going to learn something from this tutorial. I know I certainly actually picked up some tips and tricks along the way just putting the thing together, so I really hope you enjoy it, and I really hope you take something out of it. Without further ado, let's jump into the video and take a look at this. So the number one thing that we're going to take a look at here is calculations. Now, calculations might be, and probably is, the most advanced and powerful way to blend channels. That's right, these things here, channels in Adobe Photoshop. And calculations is particularly useful when you have complex selections that you're trying to make, something like the edge of her hair, but also if you have maybe a complex tree or something against a sky, calculations can be very useful. Yeah, we're going to take a look at how to use calculations to make a pretty complex selection here. You may think, hey, why can't we go select and use select and mask, or use the quick selection tool and use refine edge? Well, the short answer is because those refine edge tools just aren't that great yet. In fact, calculations not used well isn't that great either, but calculations is just how we're going to go about doing this. Now, I have done a little bit of groundwork here. I've gone ahead and created a selection around her body, her arms, her dress, all of that. I just used the quick selection tool to do that, and then just spent a little bit of time refining the edges of that, but not really much time at all. It took less than 5 minutes. And you can see I just used the lasso tool and extended that selection up above, so it's basically cutting out around her face, but not that really complex edge of her hair. The white stuff here in my channel, that's the selection. So we haven't gotten to that difficult edge, right? We haven't gotten to that tough edge around her hair. That's where we're going to use calculations specifically to get that edge, and then we'll merge our two selections together. Because right now, if I Command or Control click on this channel, you're going to see it's going to load that area as a selection. Command or Control D to deselect. Here's how we use calculations now that we're a couple minutes deep in this video. We're going to go Image, and well, we need to select our layer. That would help, right? Image, calculations, there we go. And I'm actually going to cancel this right off the bat because we don't want to have our model body channel selected and turned on. You want to just be working on your composite RGB layer in this case. So we're going to go Image, Calculations. You're going to see what we get is a rather complex dialog box, and it's basically taking a channel and merging it with another channel and allowing us to invert either channel and use a blending mode in this process, of blending these channels together. So I can say, all right, that's great. All of the white stuff here would be what would be selected when I output this to a new channel. See, I can output it to just a straight selection, a new channel, or a new document. The reason I'm outputting it as a new channel is because basically it's going to function as a saved selection. So it's going to be as good as a selection, except, hey, it's saved. New document, that's not really what we want in this case. We would use new document in some other cases with calculations. But what we want to do is make her hair white, really, because that's going to mean that that's the bit that's selected. So let's just tick on invert here with both of these, and you can see right off the bat we're getting a good sort of white block there over her hair. Now, I should point out here that this method particularly works well when you have finer selections you're trying to make over a solid colored background. That's why I'm using a girl over a studio background. It may seem like a hyper-specific application, but you think, hey, I'm shooting a bunch of people with crazy hair over a studio background, that's when this is going to be best. Or, your entire head is up above the sky or something like that. The more contrast between the hair and the background, the better this is going to work. And we're going to take some time to explain it, but once you get moving with it, you're going to be able to hammer through this and hammer out this process pretty quickly. So we're here in calculations. We've got red channel and red channel selected. We're using the blend mode multiply. We can change this. We can try screen and see how that kind of blends together. You can see the hair is really solid white. We want to be careful that it's not too solid white because that's going to really make the edges, if I zoom in on the edges of her hair, it's going to make the edges of her hair start to look kind of chunky and broken up and not at all like we want them to look. And in fact, you can see we're starting to introduce a lot of brightness into the background out here. I'm not too concerned about that. Again, I'm only really concerned about the edge of her hair. I want her hair to be as close to solid white as we can get it, and I want the background around her head to be as close to solid black as we can get it. We can also play around with add and subtract. Sometimes they have interesting mixes that you can get. If we set like offset to 128, That's a little bit too bright. Maybe set it's like 25 instead. It's just kind of boosting everything. Scale, we can knock it, well, scale, knock it down to 1. That's not real. Add is not going to work in this case. Let's try subtract, and we would invert one of these. Let's maybe invert just the top channel. And there you go. Still probably not as good as either multiply or screen. I'm probably going to roll with multiply though. Make sure we have both channels set to invert. I can try reducing the opacity. It's going to bring up the brightness a little bit. Again, I don't care about all this stuff down here. I care about the edge up here, right? That edge of the hair. That edge of the hair. We're still going to have to make it a little bit more solid white. But I think that'll be all right. We could try going like with green. That actually brightens things up a little bit. That's a little bit too much. Let's go with the blue channel. And you can see the blue channel is really going to brighten things up as well. If I crank the opacity back to 100, still blue is not going to work. Let's go back to red channel. Maybe one red and one blue. That actually works pretty well with a blending mode of multiply, opacity of 100%. We're still going to need to brighten up the hair a little bit, but I'll show you how to do that now. Let's hit OK. And if we go over to our channels panel, you can see, sure enough, look at that. We have this new alpha channel. The first thing we're going to do right off the bat is grab the lasso tool, and we're just going to make a nice big selection here around her hair. I'm just going to come right up through here, right around her ear, and then out the other side, and up around. So basically, we've just selected her hair, and I'm going to inverse this selection. I'm going to select inverse, and I'm going to fill this with black. Edit, fill, and from the contents menu, I'm just going to choose solid black, hit OK, Command or Control D to deselect. So now we're just working on her hair, right? That this is the edge we cared most about, and we can see when compared with solid black, and you see how it's like very dark gray next to solid black. So what we're going to do is we're going to go Image, Adjustments, Levels to bring up levels, and the first thing we'll do is try to bump the black to solid black. There we go, that's pretty good. And then we'll drag the white slider over and try to really just boost these whites. Boost them, boost them, boost them. Maybe I'll grab the midtone slider and slide it a little bit to the left. Again, I'm just watching these edges. I don't want them to appear too chunky. That's gonna cause us issues down the road if things get too chunky. There we go, hit OK. And then probably what I'll do here to just take care of some of this grayness in here is grab my brush tool, set it to the blend mode, and this is the brush blend mode here, by the way, the brush blend mode, not the layer blend mode. Layer blend mode's over here. We're just working with the brush tool. We're going to set this to the blend mode of soft light. An opacity of 100% is probably fine, but just for safety's sake, let's reduce the opacity to 50. I'm going to make sure I'm working here on the new Alpha 1 channel. I'm painting with white, and I'm just going to paint over some of these white areas just to make sure that it's nice and solid white. And what the soft light blend mode is going to do is it's really just going to not allow my brush to paint anywhere except where it's already kind of white or very light gray. See, I try to paint out here in the black, nothing happens. So that's good. That's going to really make sure that we just kind of take control of the hair the way it needs to be controlled, and everything's going to look pretty nice in the end. All right, there we go. Something like that's probably fine. Let's turn our RGB composite channel back on. You can see there's our selection. We actually haven't even gotten all of the hair, but I think we've gotten enough that it'll look pretty natural. And I'm going to turn on the other model body channel. Actually, we don't really need to have either of them turned on. We just hold down our Command or Control key, click on the hair to load that as a selection, hold down Shift and the Command or Control key, and select model body, and it's going to add to that selection. You can see we've got this big selection now. We're going to select our RGB composite layer, right? Go back to the layers panel, and we're just going to apply a layer mask. So we can just go like layer, layer mask, reveal selection. So it's going to hide everything outside of the selection. And if we back up, we can see it's done a pretty good job. If I zoom in on the top of the hair, we can see that some of this definitely is see-through. And this is where you'll go, make sure you have the mask selected here. Grab that brush tool, keep the mode on soft light, maybe bump the opacity up to about 80% here. Paint with white, and then just click over these areas that need to be thickened up. And you'll really be able to go in there and just fill those areas back in without doing crazy damage to the edges of her hair. And again, if you have a tablet, this goes really quickly. I'm going to bump this up to 100% opacity to really try to fly through this here. And we can you can just go over all of this and just kind of clean up the edges, add a little bit of the kind of the matte color back into it, and just make sure everything looks kind of as it should. And then you could take your model or take whatever it is you're cutting off of a background, drag it over to a new image. You can see that there is this bizarre red edge light, which is kind of throwing a little bit of a wrench into our selection. But all things considered, if you do this 5 or 10 times, or maybe not even that many times, you're going to be able to fly through making pretty complex selections pretty quickly, and it just does it in a much different way than selected mask or refine edge would. And I think in a lot of cases it's just a much more effective way to go about creating these complex hair selections, especially when that selection is over a solid color background and you got good contrast between the hair and the background. Just does a really good job. By the way, you can shift-click the mask like I just did to temporarily disable the mask. But let's move on to the second tip. Now, before we go much further, I do want to let you guys know I'm selling a course over on tutvid.com. Boom, a link just appeared up in the top corner. It's all about how to retouch images in Photoshop. I really think you're going to like it. And if you head over and pick up a copy of it, you just help support what we do here at tutvid.com. And thank you for that. If not, this tutorial is free, and it continues on right now. Now, speaking of hair and complex hair selections, we're going to be playing with this complex hair selection in a second, because the second tip in Photoshop that I think is vastly underused, and maybe not as well known as it should be, is defringing in general, defringing and decontaminating edges of selections. So what is defringing? Well, let's take a look at this little Twitter graphic. It's just, I just scalped it off of Google Images, nothing super high quality, but let's say I want to cut the little Tweety bird out of the middle of the blue circle. Well, what would I do? Probably grab the magic wand tool. I've got it up on its own little layer, click on the bird, and do something like select inverse, and then just hit my delete key and Command or Control D to deselect, and I've gotten rid of all the blue, and I just have the white bird. Well, the problem is, and check this out, if we really take a close look at the edge, can you see all of the blue pixels that are left? So this would be very problematic if this was like a white or very light gray graphic going over a white or a black background or something. You have a blue edge that's going to be noticeable. It's going to look unprofessional. It's going to look unkempt. There's just something not right about that graphic, right? Well, defringing is the process of getting rid of that little fringe of color. We are defringing. Here's how you do it. We just go Layer, Matting, and select Defringe. Now, I should mention there is this Remove Black or White Matte. These two options work particularly well if you're cutting like a white graphic off a black or dark gray background, or vice versa, like a black graphic off of a white background, and you have just a little bit of white edge. Boom, hit Remove White Matte. Both of these would actually work well to get rid of the blue as well, but I'm going to go with a straight defringe, and here in my dialog box, I'll choose like 2 pixels. It really doesn't need to be much. Hit OK. And look at that, a perfect white graphic. See, there's before, there's after. See what it does to the edge? It just corrects everything. And we have a perfect white graphic with not a drip, an ounce, a dot of blue to be seen. What a sight that is. All right, I'm going to shut that off. Now, we have an okay selection of a very complex head of hair. And color decontamination, if you noticed with our defringe layer, up here under Layer Matting, there is color decontaminate, but it's not an available option, and that's because this is not a masked layer. Color decontaminate works in conjunction with your layer mask or on layers that have a layer mask applied to them. So with this layer, we can use a color decontaminate and try to just clean up some of the just hazy color that's coming through. Let's go Layer, Matting, Color Decontaminate. See that? And we'll turn preview on, and you can just choose to you could crank up or reduce the amount of color decontamination. You can see we can bring through or drop away varying levels of background color. So if this is a very dark background we're placing her over and we just want to expand things a little bit, we can crank up the color decontaminate and really help blend or just blend the edges really of her hair into this image. Now, color decontaminate tends to, I think, be a little destructive, and I'll show you why here. If I hit OK and then I hold down Shift and deselect or temporarily disable the mask, you can see all of this out here. This is all the work of color decontaminate. So, just use it wisely, if you will, knowing that you can't really go back and undo it much. There also is, by the way, a color decontaminate if we go like select, and mask. When you're outputting, if you output to a new layer, well, I guess really output to much of anything, you can choose to decontaminate the colors as well. You don't really have that slider that you have when you apply it to a layer with a layer mask, but you can choose to decontaminate the colors. It just, I don't know, when working with Select a Mask or Refine Edge, which by the way, Shift-click, Select a Mask, and you get Refine Edge, and you can also choose to decontaminate the colors there. I don't know. I don't really like to use it as much. Again, it's a pretty destructive effect, but sometimes it is just what the doctor ordered. So don't sleep on decontaminating the edges, but just know how it works with those layers with layer mask, and just know that you're kind of creating a little bit of a mess, but if it's what you need to do, it's going to be what you need to do, and it's more valuable to know that that tool is in your toolbox than to pretend like it's not there. So now moving right along to tip number 3, I want to talk about LUTs, color lookup tables, color LUTs. It's really not a very used feature or function of Photoshop. I'm going to show you how I create them and how I implement them. So you create a color LUT by just creating a custom style on your image using adjustment layers. Now, in order to save these out as a color lookup table, or save the color lookup tables if I want to use proper terminology here, I need my background layer to be a true proper background layer, because you just need it in order for Photoshop to save out these adjustment layer effects. So I'm going to go Layer, New, Background from Layer, and I have that layer selected. Voila. I'm going to select these adjustment layers by selecting the bottom one, hold down Shift, select the top one, of course, File, Export, and look at that. Color lookup tables. Have you ever noticed that? Again, that's File, Export, Color lookup tables. Let's go ahead and select that. And we can give it a description if we want. I'm not going to. Grid quality, quality, I like to work with at least 64 grid points. You can sometimes get away with 32, in fact, probably oftentimes, but it's a high quality, 64 grid points tends to work great all the time. Formats, I almost always export 3DL and Cube. If I'm just using it in Photoshop, I'm usually going Cube. You can also export these color lookup tables for Premiere Pro. In the event of doing that, I'm usually doing 3DL, but you have some other options as well. In this case, I'm just going to export the Cube format. I'm going to hit OK. It's going to ask me where I want to save it. I'm going to say, hey, you know what, desktop, and I'm going to call this grading01.lut, and I'm going to choose to save that. All right, so we've created our lookup tables. We want to now apply this effect to another image, like this landscape image, right? Just this serene pastoral scene. We're going to come up here to our adjustment layers. And by the way, you can go Layer, New Adjustment Layer. And this is the one we're after, Color Lookup. It's this icon right here, the one on the far right, that little table icon. It's the color lookup table. Now, before we load our color lookup table that we just created, if you hit this little drop-down menu, you have all of these built-in effects. Now, granted, they're not all that great all the time. I mean, there's this crisp, warm look, and of course, because it's an adjustment layer, you can reduce the opacity, and there's before and there's after. They can do nice things. It's a very fast, easy sort of fix or effect. It's not always a fix. A lot of times you do a lot of damage. Film stock 50, meh, you know. Futuristic, bleak, it's actually not too bad. It looks super, like, cinematic, like you haven't done any color grading yet. Horror blue, I don't know, late sunset, ooh, that doesn't, I'm not digging that at all. Moonlight, nope. So you got all kinds of different things you can do. That's my point. Or you can choose Load 3D LUT. So let's select that, and there's our grading.cube. Go ahead and hit OK. Now, the reason I like to work with the cube here in Photoshop is because I can tweak the data order or table order. Number one, you can see the effect that it generated. It's just, you know, it's an effect that we had control over creating. So it's a little bit more sublime, a little bit more my style, a little bit more your style if you were creating your own color lookup tables. Data order, RGB, we could go BGR, blue, green, red, and that's going to really kind of funkify things here. Give it a second. It's a big image. And you can also reverse the table order. If you reverse data order and then reverse table order, it actually gives the whole effect an even more muted, less saturated type effect most of the time. I'm going to go back to just the original RGB and table order of BGR and just kind of let that ride as it is. I can adjust the opacity, and voila. Color lookup tables, don't sleep on them. They're super powerful. It's a great adjustment layer, and it's a great way to take an effect you've applied to one image, and you can apply this to as many images as you want. You can load this color LUT into as many images as you want. You can share this LUT with your friends and say, hey, apply this effect to my images, or you could send it off to your retoucher if you have somebody doing retouching for you and say, hey, when you retouch my wedding photos, here's the color treatment I would like applied to them. Boom, they use the color lookup table adjustment layer. Just like that, it's done. Let's move on to the fourth tip and trick and hidden, obscure feature of Photoshop. And what is that fourth feature? Well, the fourth feature is the color replacement brush tool, which is actually it's an interesting tool to talk about and to use, but a tool that not too many people use. And I think partially because it is kind of destructive, but here's how it works. Underneath the brush tool, we have something called the color replacement tool. Now, the way this works is you have set a foreground color. Let's say we want to change her pink shirt here to, I don't know, let's go like yellow or something. We'll go something very different. So let's choose a pretty neon yellowy color. When you start messing with yellow and switching colors to yellow in Photoshop, things can go haywire quickly. Now, one of the things that you need to do is you need to work directly on the layer. So you might want to duplicate the layer, Command or Control J. That way, if you completely mess it up and you hate it, you can just get rid of the layer or hide the layer or whatever. Now I'm going to make my brush tool a little bigger, right click and upsize it a little bit, upsize it a little bit more and a little bit more, and reduce the hardness quite a bit. There we go, something like that. And I'm going to set the blend mode, or the working mode of this brush tool to color. I almost exclusively, when I use this, work in hue, which is right here, or color. So color is going to replace the color in your image with both the hue of your foreground color and also the saturation of your foreground color. Hue is simply going to swap the hue. So this is a very bright pink she's got. If I start painting over it, we're going to get like the same level of yellow, just swapped right in on top of it without really doing much of anything. It kind of looks a little mustardy, kind of looks a little nasty if you ask me. I don't really like it. Color should be a little bit more vibrant and intense. It's not, because once more, we're working with yellow. Let's change this to something more interesting. Let's go with like an orange maybe, or you know what, let's go blue. Let's go blue. We're going to go blue. Let's go blue. I know it's close to pink, but we're going blue. Mode color. Now, next up, we've got this continuous sampling option. That basically means that when you're using this tool, Photoshop is going to continually search for new pixels that match the color over which you're painting. See how I just painted that so perfectly? That's because the center of my brush tool, that little crosshair, that Photoshop is using that point to detect and say, hey, look, only change the color of that colored stuff that the brush is touching. Don't mess with the white. Don't mess with their skin tone out here or any of that. So I can very quickly go and paint over that stuff. The other modes have to do with they're just different ways that Photoshop is going to sample and select the color. I have a whole video on using this brush tool where I go into a little bit more depth on using those. But for the most part, you're going to be using continuous sample, 95% of the time when you're using this brush tool. Limits, contiguous is just what you're pretty much always going to use. Tolerance has to do with how sort of strict the brush is. If you have a bigger tolerance, it's just a higher likelihood that you're going to paint out over other colors, but also if the brush tool isn't quite getting completely to the edges of your object or whatever you're trying to change the color of, you may need to boost the tolerance of that brush a little bit, and you can go ahead and just paint until you change all the color that you need to change. And it's just, it's pretty quick and easy. It's, you just go in and do your thing. And here I'm going to make my brush tool a little bit larger. We're going to go through and see if I increase the tolerances a little bit, I'll be able to really paint over this and change it all. I really shouldn't have stopped painting, because that's when that kind of edge establishes itself, if you will. And I need to just really paint over all that stuff. And you can see I come in and really quite painlessly, as I explain this tool to you, I can change the color of her entire shirt pretty quickly, pretty easily. Didn't have to create a mask, didn't have to select anything, worry about the edges too much. Everything is just done. Like I said, there are some limitations to the tool. It is kind of destructive, and it can be a little weird at times. But all things considered, it most of the time works really, really well. And using those settings of just the color blend mode, continuously sampling, contiguous limits, and a good tolerance, and you're going to be able to do a lot of pretty cool stuff with the color replacement brush in Photoshop. Like everything else in this video, don't sleep on it. Now, next up, the fifth tip that I want to talk about is targeting specific colors using hue saturation. This is actually really cool, very helpful, and very effective in selecting massive amounts of complex colors throughout your image and changing saturation, hue, brightness levels. It's really neat. Check it out. We're going to add a hue saturation adjustment layer. It's that bad boy right there. Boom. Add hue saturation. Now, what I'm interested in is this little hand icon. It's sort of like the color selection tool, if you will. And if I use this, I can select something like the reds here. And if I just drag left or right, it's going to adjust the saturation. You can see how I'm sort of getting rid of the saturation in most of the reds throughout the image. Well, if I hold down the Command or Control key and click and drag, it's going to slide or swap the hue of that particular color that I'm selecting. Now, check this out. If I make these berries like hot pink, I'm also attacking the shadows here where these berries are casting a bit of a red shadow onto the pineapple or the mango or whatever fruit that is in the bowl alongside this. And that's problematic because I really just want these like cranberries and the raspberries and the strawberries to change color, and I don't want the shadows to change color. Well, that's where we can further refine the color that's attacked by hue saturation using this color spectrum down here. So what we've got is these bits on the end are sort of where the hue saturation adjustment is sort of attacking them. It's kind of like fading out. So it's more strongly affecting these like really hot pinks and fading out as it gets to more of a bright magenta. And same thing over here. It's really attacking these dark oranges and fading as it gets to yellow. Well, the mango is pretty yellow, so the shadows are probably going to be a mixture of like the yellow and the red. So if I pull back on this and say, you know what, this bit here, let's not let hue saturation attack that as much. And look at what's happening. Watch the fruit. Watch this part of the fruit here, right? I'm going to crunch this in a little bit, and I'm going to pull this back, and look at how we just like purify that, right? The berries are still really nice and pink because they were all very, very red. So we're just attacking a very, very specific hue within this image, right? And then if I say, you know what, all right, now that we've done that, we want to go ahead and change the hue of these mango slices. So let's go ahead and select the mango slices. Maybe we'll make them more orange, almost like it's cantaloupe. I'm going to pull that back, and the shadows are really getting funkified again, so I'm going to reduce the effect, or maybe increase, stretch out the shadows to make them a little bit more, make them kind of blend it together a little bit more, right? So the area of fading this effect in across our colors is much larger, right? And the concentrated effect, I just drag that handle, that little handle right there, I dragged it inward a little bit to just limit the effect a little bit more, all right? And for the most part, it's a fading effect on both ends, much more than just a very concentrated effect. So using this finger slider tool, and then further refining using these handles down here at the bottom of your hue saturation panel allows you to very quickly go in and create extremely complex color changes across your image. So I can go to like this cliffs image, hue saturation, say, you know what, I want to make the greens here, I want to make them much more saturated, but also I'm going to hold down Command or Control, I'm going to make them much more just straight up green, right? But I don't want it attacking the reds like at all. I want it to be very specific to the greens. I don't want to get into yellow too much, just these greens. So I adjust and tweak where it's attacking, and there's before and there's after. I mean, you can even see over here, just like watch the algae in this rock wall as I shut that off and turn it on. It's just attacking all of those green pixels, and it's enriching all of the green throughout this image, and it's not messing with the sky or the little stream coming through this. It's just enhancing all of the greens, and specifically the greens targeted, using that hyper targeting there within hue saturation. So next up for number 6, we've got something pretty cool, and this has to do with vanishing point. I'm going to create a new layer here, and I'm going to call this grids. We can export grids that we create in Vanishing Point as graphics, which can be really cool and really useful if we're maybe like overlaying what's supposed to look like a drawing or creating a specific kind of artwork. Here's how we do it. I like to work on a new blank layer because when those grids get created, they're pixel grids. I want them to be up on their own layer and not just overlaid straight on and baked into my image. So I'm going to go Filter, Vanishing Point. I'm going to create just a couple. I'm going to zoom out, Command minus or Control minus on the PC. I'm going to click once, and I'm going to drag a Vanishing Point plane across, like to the kid's feet there, and then back, and just like that. Now, you can see how it turned out red. That means it's not a feasible perspective that I'm playing with here. So I'm going to try to mess with my perspective points a little bit. Hey, there we go. That's blue. That's good. Now, what we would do is select this little flyout menu up here, right? That little flyout menu, and go down and choose Render Grids to Photoshop. You can see it's kind of grayed out. It's a little messed up. If you see that, let's first of all go ahead and hit OK. It's going to save our grid. That's actually a little glitch in Vanishing Point. Let's go back to Vanishing Point. We still just have our one grid. We're going to hit the flyout menu. Now you can see Render Grids to Photoshop is a active available thing. We need to have at least 2 grid planes, though, in order to export them or render them into Photoshop. So I'm going to hold down my Command or Control key and pull a grid up from the side, just to like the top of these pews, just like that. So we've got just two grids. In fact, we could do one on this side, too, just for the sake of being uniform. So I'm going to hold down my Command or Control key, my Shift key, and I'm going to select each one of those grids. So Shift, click, 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 and we're going to just make sure Render Grids to Photoshop is checked on. See that? We just clicked it to check it on and hit OK, and you're going to see that those grids have come out and they're now placed up on our own layer. A couple things now. We can duplicate this because you can see the grids, they're super duper thin, right? I mean, it's just 1 pixel lines. They're really thin. We might want to thicken them up. So Command or Control J to duplicate, and then grab your Move tool and just nudge them in any direction. So let's just nudge them to the left, right? And then Command or Control J and nudge them back to the right a little bit, right? So you can just go and you can duplicate these grids all you want and just nudge them around to make the grid lines a little bit thicker. There we go, something like that. Great. And then I would just hold down my Shift key, select the top grid, hold down, well, we turned one off. Let's select this one here. I'm going to grab my Move tool. Let's just nudge this to the left one, just so there's not that little gap. Great. All right, so I would select my top grid, hold down Shift, select the bottom grid, and then do something like Layer, And where do we have it here? I'm used to using the hotkey. Merge layers. Hotkey is Command or Control E. That's the hotkey that I typically use. It's a lot faster than going layer, merge layers. And now that you have grids that are visible, it's really not over. You can take a hue saturation adjustment layer and swinging the hue slider around, you can change the hue of the grid. Now, notice how I'm changing the entire hue of the image. Like, let's say I want a green grid. I just drag that to -98, -100, whatever. But the church is all different colors. What we want to do is use the hotkey Command Option or Control Alt and the letter G, and that's going to clip our hue saturation adjustment layer right to the grids layer. So we can always double click on that hue saturation layer and change the color of the grids, and we make them red, pink, whatever, and there we go. We've adjusted just the grids and no more, and we were able to render these grids out to Photoshop so we can actually see them, played around with them, made them a little bit thicker than they were, and yeah, it's just a usable piece of artwork now in our Photoshop document. So now number 7 is a pretty cool one. I'm going to create a new layer here, and we're going to just roll with what we've got going on here. And I'm going to grab my brush tool, and I have my brush tool. I'm going to go back to normal. We had it soft light from before when we were messing around with the model. In fact, let's go back to the model image. I'm going to get rid of this mask we created for a quick second, and let's create a new layer above her. And we realize, you know, as we're painting black for some weird reason out here, we need our brush tool to be bigger. So I'm going to undo this. There's a whole number of ways you can make your brush tool bigger, but there's a really fast way you can do it. In Windows, you can hold down your Alt key and right-click. On the Mac, hold down the Control and Option key and just regular click. So I'm on the Mac, so I'm going to go Control Option and regular click. And if I pull left or right, it's going to change the size of my brush. Now, you're probably seeing a big red blob. I changed my color to green. I'll show you how to do that in a second. But pulling left or right changes the diameter of the brush, and I get an exact reading, right? 637 pixels with a hardness of 0%. If I pull up or down, that's going to change the hardness of the brush. So that's pretty cool. So I'm going to make it a very soft brush, and I'm going to make it a very large brush. Now, if I want to change the color of that heads-up display that I see, you can do that under Photoshop Preferences. If you're on Windows machine, this would be Edit Preferences. Photoshop Preferences, Cursors, and over here you have Brush Preview, and I just set the color to a lime green. I find that it just appears best over most of the kind of images that I'm working with, so I go with a lime green, but it's a nice little way to quickly change the size and the hardness of your brush while you're working in Photoshop. Use that hotkey Windows, Alt plus a right click on the Mac, Control Option plus a regular click, and you're golden. So now let's move on to number 8, and that is rotating the clone stamp tool. I'm going to zoom in on her face. Let's say for the sake of this argument, we want to take her eyebrow over here and clone stamp this thicker part over here onto the part that's tapering off. And I know you want the tapered part to be there. It looks nicer. It's just the way it's supposed to be. But just bear with me here for this example. Let's just say for some weird reason you wanted to do this. We can do this with the clone stamp tool. Now, if I take the clone stamp tool, we can use our hotkey that we just learned, Control, Option, and click. Make my brush a little bit larger. If you're on the PC, that's just your Alt and right click. I'm going to Alt or Option to sample the eyebrow out here. Now I'm up on a new layer, so I want to make sure that I'm sampling from current and below. And I just have a, whatever, 30 pixel soft edge brush. And I begin painting, and it's just going to paint in a straight line. It's not going to sort of bend with the eyebrow. How do we get this tool to do that? Well, we can do that by going Window, Clone Source, and opening up the Clone Source panel and using the rotation option. So let's just rotate this, I don't know, 20 degrees or something. Let's see what this looks like. Let's sample that. And you can see here how it's just going to paint, and it's going to sort of automatically bend in that direction and clone stamp over what we need to clone stamp over. See that? And if we need it to be more drastic, we can make it not 17.5, maybe 25 degrees or whatever it needs to be to sort of continue that eyebrow around to give her this giant eyebrow where she had that nice taper before. So using the rotation function in the Clone Source panel is a highly, highly effective way to go in and do stuff like, I need to sample a piece of the hairline, right? I need to sample a piece of this hairline and paste this over here on an angle. How do I do that? Well, I do it by rotating this. You can use this with the healing brush tool as well. It's just a really, really effective way to get great healing and great cloning in your Photoshop documents, especially when you're retouching stuff and you need your angles and your lines and everything to be just right. And once you're done with rotation, you don't have to highlight it and select 0. Just hit this little arrow. It just returns it back to 0, and you're good to go. Don't sleep on the Clone Source panel, and particularly that little rotation feature tucked right in there. All right, let's move on to number 9 here. I'm going to zoom out. And what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this top layer where we did all that nasty cloning. And I want to sharpen her up a little bit. So we're going to do this in Camera Raw. I'm going to right click and just convert it to a smart object. Out of force of habit more than anything, you can apply a smart object, or I'm sorry, you can apply Camera Raw filter to a non-smart object. But I like to work with smart objects. So I'm going to right click, choose smart object, and then go filter right there. Look at that. Camera Raw filter. Click on that to go jump into the Camera Raw filter. Now check this out. Over in the Sharpening or the Detail tab, if you hold down the Alt or Option key as you're dragging the amount, radius, detail, or masking sliders, you get some interesting information. Hold down Alt or Option, drag Sharpening, and you can see we get a black and white version of the image that is being sharpened. Now, let's double click on our zoom tool. That's going to bring us to 100%, which is really how you should work with your sharpening. And we're going to try that again. We're going to increase the sharpening. Great. And if we do it with radius, we're going to get sort of this heads-up display of exactly how much of the edges the radius is going to be attacking. So we're going to do a nice fine radius. She's got a lot of fine details in her skin. I'm going to, in fact, reduce the actual amount of sharpening. And then we can look at details. Do we want to boost those details way up or knock them way down? I think I want to keep them down low because if I boost them up, it looks like all I'm doing is sharpening noise. Speaking of sharpening noise, when you have lots of big open areas of color like these backdrops, when sharpening is applied to those areas, all it's going to be doing is sharpening noise. So the masking slider allows us to basically get rid of all the sharpening going on out in big areas like this where there's no real edge contrast. Well, how can we see what the masking slider is doing? By holding down the Alt or Option key as we drag the masking slider. So as those areas convert to black, there's no sharpening going on out there, and we can see how the sharpening is targeting all these beautiful edges in her hair, the edge of her hairline, the eyebrows, down her dress, the edges and the details in her dress, the edges of her arms, the waistband. All these different features in the photo are all being targeted, and now only those white areas are being sharpened. And I let go of my masking slider, and I'm back to my normal image. And now we have beautiful sharpening applied across this image, just to the parts of the image that we want sharpening applied to, and not to all these big chunks of background area where all we're going to be doing is sharpening noise. So we'll go ahead and just hit the OK button to commit our Camera Raw filter, and there we go. We've sharpened up this image in one of the most effective ways possible in Photoshop. Make sure you use your Alt or Option key when you're dragging those sliders in the sharpening portion of the Camera Raw filter. It's amazing. All right, now the 10th and last thing, and this is so cool. I sort of covered this in another video I did about 10 tips and tricks that every graphic designer needs to know, but I didn't really go into detail as far as how it was set up, and it's the idea of using global colors in Photoshop. What's a global color mean? Well, let's say this green and the green in the logo and the button and the graph and everything down here were all global colors, and you sent this off to a client and they said, hey, I love it, but I hate the green. Can we make it pink instead? Well, with a global color, you change one global color swatch to pink and all of the colors automatically update. How do we do that in Photoshop? Well, the secret is using a smart object. Check this out. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a new smart object. First, I'm going to create a shape layer. So I'm grabbing the rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw out a shape layer. So I'm just going to draw out a little square up here, right? And this would just be like, hey, this is just the color of stuff in our document. This is going to be a color swatch, if you will. I'm going to select the fill here, and let's just give it a hot pink. I'm going to close my properties panel. There we go, hot pink, and I'm going to call this smart-color, whatever. And then I'm going to right-click on this, and I'm going to choose Convert to Smart Object. All very important steps. So create a shape layer, and then convert it to a smart object. That's it. Now here's what we have to do. We need to hunt down every one of these green objects in our document. In fact, to save time, all I'm going to do is this green icon, the green header, and like the graph or something. So I'm going to grab my Move tool, hold down your Command or Control key, and just click on the green square. Look at that. There it is, green rectangle. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our smart color layer all the way up the top, hold down the Alt or Option key, and drag a copy of it and drop it right on top of rectangle 4. Then we can click and drag that pink square over and hit Command or Control T and just drag it out so it covers the whole area. All right, does not have to be exact because we're next going to use the hotkey Command Option or Control Alt G and clip the smart color layer to that green rectangle. Great. So we made that pink. Now we're going to select this little icon. So Command or Control click on the icon. There it is. It's shape number 8. We're going to do the same thing. Alt or Option click and drag a copy of that layer down. We're going to move this over, just drop it right on top of the icon, and then hold down Command, Option, or Control, Alt, G, clip it, and you can see we've got a nice little pink icon. Great. Let's do the same thing with the grid here. So Command or Control click on the graph, there it is, named graph. And we're going to duplicate the smart color down, hold down Alt or Option, and just drag down to the bottom of your layers panel, and layers panel is going to click down, 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 slowly but surely, slowly but surely. It'll get there. There we go, and just drop this smart color right on top of the graph. Now with your Move tool, click and drag the color down here, and Command or Control T, and I'm just going to drag it out over the graph. Great. And then again, that hotkey Command Option or Control Alt G, and it's going to mask that color to the pink graph. All right, great. So let's just say that's all the green, just to save time here. I'm not going to go through and like get the icon and the logo and the bars and all this junk here. Let's just say there we go. We've got those elements that are pink. And the client says, hey, you know what? Oof, I really don't like the pink. Like, can we try blue? Here's all you got to do. We have multiple objects that are colored with this pink. Double click on the smart object. It's going to open up a new .psb. You see that? .psb. And what's in this .psb? Well, what's in here is that vector shape that we created. Now, the nice thing about the vector shape is, number one, you can scale it up or down, huge, small, whatever, and it's always going to be sharp and have crisp edges, so we never have to worry about like gradations of color or blurry pixelated edges. But also, because it's a shape layer, we can just double click the shape layer color, the thumbnail right here, and it's going to open up the color picker, and we can say, you know what, let's go with a nice light blue like that. Hit OK. Command or Control S to save it, close the .psb, and look at that. Everything that we clipped this color to, the icon, the little header area, our color swatch, the graph, they all automatically update. And you can have this across like multiple artboards. If you're working on something like an iPhone UI layout and you got 100 different icons, you use this method to color them all. And when the client says, hey, look, I hate the yellow, can we make it orange? Instead of going back and changing 100 icons, you update one smart object, color, shape, boom, everything updates. You're absolutely going to love it. You know what? Let me give you one bonus tip. One more thing before I let you go. Check this out. Let's go back out to the Finder. This is just sort of bonus tip number 11 here. And I am going to go ahead and let's say we want to open this .psd. It's a pretty big file, over 1/4 GB, 350 megs. Let's say we don't care about all the layers and all the junk. You can open a flattened PSD if before you open it, you hold down Shift and Option. This would be Shift and Alt on the PC. Double-click to open it. And look at this. Photoshop says, hey, would you like to read just the composite data instead? Yeah, I want to open this thing faster. Hit OK, and it's going to pretend like it takes a long time to open, but it doesn't. Boom, it opens right up. See, everything is flattened. Everything looks great. Everything's ready to rock and roll. You can open a much bigger PSD much faster. That was just kind of a little bonus thing I threw in at the end. Those smart colors, the global colors, huge, huge time saver, especially if you're a graphic designer or a UI designer. As a graphic designer, just imagine if you're doing an illustration or something, you've got 100 different blocks throughout your illustration that are all one particular green or pink or blue or orange, whatever, and you need to update or change them all. Boom, you change one color, one smart color shape layer, and everything updates. It is a thing of beauty. Guys, 10 hidden and obscure Photoshop features and tips. I don't just hope you like it. I hope you love it, and you've loved it. Make sure you smash the thumbs up button. It helps it so much, helps these videos so much to just percolate up so other people can see them and they get shared amongst the YouTube community. Drop a comment below if you feel so inclined. Make sure you hit the red button, subscribe to this channel, and for 10 hidden and obscure features of Photoshop that you probably knew about some of them, but hopefully maybe not all of them, and you learned a thing or two in this video. That's it. Get it? Got it? Good. Nathaniel Dodson, tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one.